Hello everyone, welcome back to another reaction video. Today we're taking a look at the 5 good emperors. We're continuing on with Dovahhatty's legendary series about the unbiased history of Rome. So without further ado, let's get going. An epic intro, fitting for these legendary emperors. Yeah, Hadrian, the Chad, Giga Chad. It's gotta be Trajan, right?
The Flavian dynasty was shattered. By the end of the 1st century, thanks to the Senate, the Roman Empire stood once again at the precipice of civil war. The senators were quick to start shilling for their own favor.
Yeah, when we last left off, Domitian had just been assassinated. And Domitian, as we discussed, was quite a controversial emperor, regarded by the Senate at least as a tyrant. And Domitian had, well, the same feelings towards the Senate. So, you know, this is probably how it always was going to end.
To take over power, but having assassinated such a competent and beloved emperor, none such vermin would do. Indeed, there was only one man they could elevate that was both competent, respected, and not feared: Nerva, by then very old and childless.
Yeah, so Nerva at this point is a very elder statesman. He had been an important figure during the reign of Emperor Nero, and we don't really know much about the interlude between his services to Nero and his accession as emperor. However, we do know that he was quite a competent administrator and by all means a skilled politician, considering he was able to be elevated to the imperial purple. Of course, the fact that he was old and childless meant that he was a perfect temporary emperor until a more permanent solution could be found. And although Nerva is by no means a match for his successors among the 5 good emperors, he was certainly not incompetent, as I'm sure we'll discuss. Gotta love the Civilization soundtrack here.
Suddenly burdened with the empire, Nerva sought to restore order by pleasing the petty senators, allowing them to desecrate Domitian's statues and squabble freely among themselves. As he set about...
Yeah, so immediately after Domitian had been assassinated, the Senate passed a decree that stated that all memories, all statues of Emperor Domitian were to be systematically destroyed. So basically, they're gonna pretend that there never was a Domitian, basically.
Simultaneously reducing taxes and keeping the plebs entertained, with the help of Domitian's administrative staff, that is. Even cancelling a tax the Jews had to pay, so they wouldn't feel like revolting. But in his pursuit to please...
Yeah, so to shore up support among the plebeians, Nerva performed some economic reforms which aimed at lowering the tax burden of the plebeians. So many taxes were lowered or abolished, even a controversial tax on Jews, which, you know, the Romans and the Jews are, how should I say this, not friends. and there will be we will be hearing more about the unfortunate fate of the Jews during Emperor Hadrian's reign.
The senatorial parasites, he allowed Domitian's assassins to evade punishment, something Domitian's Praetorian Guard couldn't abide by. One night, the Praetorians invaded the imperial palace, slaughtered the local guards, and ran a long-delayed massive purge on all of Domitian's assassins. Nerva was taken hostage during all this, but never harmed. In fact, they just let him go, and he thanked them afterwards.
Yeah, so this was really the major problem for Nerva. He needed stability, and he couldn't get stability by punishing Domitian's assassins, because he needed to keep Senate on his side. And so he had to let them go, but of course Domitian's Praetorian Guard was not all too happy. They laid siege to the imperial palace. As he just said, Nerva just walked out unscathed, which is quite an accomplishment considering the fate of others who had suffered at the hand of the Praetorians.
Everyone agreed a purge was needed, but old Nerva's days were counted either way. Nearing his death, Nerva cemented his reputation as the first of the 5 good emperors by performing the greatest action possible, adopting Trajan as his heir.
Yeah, this act alone makes Nerva qualified to be within the 5 good emperors, or counted among them. Although he was sort of forced into doing this during this Praetorian revolt, but nonetheless it was an excellent choice.
The senators were quick to start bitching, being denied their chance to lobby for their favorite vermin to become emperor. All while Trajan governed Lower Germania, scaring the Germs away with his mere presence. It was then that he received a messenger from Rome, bearing news of his adoption by Nerva. The messenger's name? Hadrian. They were second-degree
Of
cousins,
course.
you see, both descended from Roman colonists in Hispania, born in Italica, a city founded by Scipio Africanus himself to host his veterans. Trajan's own father had served beside Vespasian and Titus in Judea, while the young genius trained in Syria, and just like Caesar, instigated an aura of respect and reverence wherever he went. Once Hadrian's father died, his cousin Trajan, alongside a man named Antinous, took responsibility for Hadrian and his sister, raising them as the children he never had. For while Trajan did get married with a virtuous wife, he much enjoyed boy pussy instead. Hadrian, however, was so obsessed with twink-ass that he gained the title Greekling, embracing his duty as a Trojan descendant and civilizing all twink Greekoids he found with his massive Roman dick.
Well, Hadrian had a, how should we say this, a very keen interest in all things Greek, and he was sort of obsessed with Greek history, Greek culture, Greek architecture, everything Greek.
And while the Spaniard cousins traveled south, Nerva got so tired of dealing with the Senate's shit that he suffered a stroke. Being taken to his villa, he later developed a fever, dying shortly after. And as Trajan traversed the Limes Germanicus, having been informed of Nerva's death, he finished his border inspections and set off for Rome.
Yeah, so Nerva's reign didn't last too long, about 15 months I believe, and it was not all that impactful on the grand scheme of things. Still, like I said, the adoption of Trajan was his single greatest accomplishment.
It's often hard to realize the importance of the times one lives in, but while few knew it at the time, as Trajan entered Rome on foot, they were about to experience the height of Roman civilization. As Trajan approached the Senate, he was very respectful, emulating Augustus's benevolence to keep the treacherous senators in line.
Yeah, this is something that many an emperor did. They loved to emulate Emperor Augustus's feigned deference towards the Senate. Oh no, I'm not an emperor, I'm merely first among equals. It made the Senate feel important and still like they were respected and had power and had prestige. In reality, they had none of that.
Continuing Nerva's policy to placate them, including just as much bread and circuses for the masses. One of Trajan's countless skills was his ability to recognize talent, assembling the best of the best the empire could offer, sending them to govern the provinces and legions with great autonomy. One such brilliant mind was Apollodorus of Damascus, the genius engineer he met while in Syria, whom Hadrian would always fangirl around, and Lucius Quietus, the civilized Berber prince, bringing both along with him wherever he went, including Dacia. As we'll remember, Decabulus, being a filthy barbarian, betrayed his word, using the funds and weapons given to him to fortify against the Germs to instead fortify against the Empire, rallying the local tribes against Rome. Trajan, of course, was revolted by this betrayal and asked the Senate permission to invade, which they unanimously did, but civilizing Dacia would prove to be a one-sided affair. For Trajan would have to defeat a people as well armed as the legions, thanks to their iron mines, defending steep mountain forts built with stolen Roman technology, all while enjoying local terrain knowledge and a massive advantage in numbers. Trajan was about to fucking annihilate them.
Yeah, the invasion of Dacia was, or Dacia, however you want to say it, was quite a complicated affair for all the reasons that were just mentioned, and if it were any lesser general, any lesser man, I don't think it could have been done as completely, well, like they said, Trajan is about to obliterate them. He's a military genius, what can you say?
Having Apollodorus build a temporary bridge, Trajan crossed the Danube, invading with 2 legionary columns and meeting Decabulus' legions at Apae. As he relentlessly slaughtered the barbarians, Jupiter sent a powerful storm onto the battlefield, terrifying the Dacians into a retreat. After returning to the Empire to pass the winter, Decabulus charged out of nowhere, crossing the frozen Danube in a surprise attack, but the ice collapsed on them, submerging his army in the back, while Trajan quickly mobilized a vicious cavalry counterattack in the front, led by Lucius Quietus. Beaten back, and with Trajan's legions threatening to advance further, Decabulus promptly surrendered. In his infinite mercy, Trajan allowed the Decabulus to remain as client king, only ceding some territory and promising to be loyal this time. As part of the treaty, the Dacians provided the resources for Apollodorus to build a huge permanent bridge across the Danube, which would remain the largest one ever built for a millennium, threatening the Dacians with an immediate...
We talked about this before, but Roman engineering is quite something. It was so ahead of its time. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it, how long it took before we got up to Roman standards again, when we entered the medieval period. And, it wasn't until the 19th century, basically, that we had roads that had similar or better quality than the Roman ones. And they weren't the knowledge used to build these architectural wonders were either lost, or there simply wasn't enough resources to do it among the petty, smaller kingdoms that would exist during the medieval era. It really took the resources of an empire to maintain and construct all of these architectural wonders.
Imperial response, should they revolt. And of course he revolted again. Not even a year later he was already sacking Moesia again like the fucking barbarian he was. Utterly pissed, Trajan would invade again, starting the Third Dacian War to make sure there wouldn't be a fourth. With the military skill born only once in age, Trajan, alongside Quietus, crushed all barbarian hordes in his way as he marched to the Dacian capital, laying siege to it. As he did so, a local barbarian betrayed Decabulus, showing where the water supply of the capital was located. Trajan then cut it off, forcing them to surrender, as Decabulus cowardly fled towards Sarmatia. Meanwhile, Trajan was informed by another Dacian trader of where Decabulus' gold deposits were, and with this massive gain at his hands, there was only one thing left to do. Decabulus was later encircled by Trajan's cavalry, and, refusing to pay for his crimes against civilization, he killed himself to avoid capture. Dacia was then broken apart into subservient tribes, with its valuable mines annexed by the empire. Trajan would then bring Decabulus' severed head and right.
Yeah, that's the main benefit of conquering Dacia, is to get access to the very good mining resources, such as iron and gold. And other than that, though, there wasn't much value to Dacia, and it would prove extremely hard to defend for future emperors.
Arm to Rome, throwing them at the Gammonian stairs, where Sejanus had once been strangled and Vitellius beheaded. To celebrate the conquest of Dacia, Trajan held a majestic triumph, bringing to Rome 700 million sesterces worth of gold with him, and another 700 million more every single year from the new province.
Now, I'm not sure how accurate these numbers are, but it was a massive amounts of loot taken from Dacia and brought back to Rome. And well, if there was any question about Trajan's capabilities, then they were dispelled at this moment.
With these new riches, Trajan would benefit the empire as a whole, proclaiming 123 days of celebration in the Eternal City. After pleasing the plebs, he would have Apollodorus build him a great column to show how Dacia was conquered, Trajan's Column, then a forum for the patricians, Trajan's Forum, and a market for everyone, Trajan's Market, and a road for everyone as well. Can you guess? Yes, Via Traiana. And when the client king of the Nabateans died, Trajan sent his legions to directly annex it, bringing civilization to Arabia by building a road connecting it to the Red Sea, going through Petra in its route. Yes, the parallels are only going to increase. For the next 7 years, Trajan ensured the Roman peace, spending his off time exchanging letters with Pliny the Younger, a good friend of both Tacitus and Suetonius, and assigned the governorship of Bithynia.
Yeah, so Trajan is one of these emperors, one of the first ones to really start elevating their friends to high imperial office. Pliny the Younger, one of them. And of course, we have Suetonius and Tacitus here, two very famous Roman historians who are responsible for much of what we know about this period.
Yeah. There, he attested to the emperor's wisdom and virtue, asking him advice on what to do about the Christians. Trajan's advice? Ignore them. For even among the Christ-cucks of the future, Trajan would still be universally loved as a virtuous pagan. But while Trajan did everything in his power to make the Pax Romana true to its name, the barbarians of the Far East wouldn't allow him. As the king of the Parthians, in his arrogance, put his own nephew on the throne of Armenia. As the Roman emperor, Trajan had an agreed right to veto this choice, but Vologases ignored him.
Yeah, so the question of Armenia is a constant one between Rome and Parthia, and later the Sassanids. Armenia was always a client kingdom of either one of these superpowers, or at times they were split. And in this case, they were right. According to treaty, Trajan had the right to veto the pick. And, well, the warnings from Rome were faithfully ignored, let's just say that.
Betrayed a second time by barbarian treachery, Trajan gathered his legions once more, set on conquering Parthia once and for all. He first started with Armenia, quickly taking over the mountains, putting the king in prison, where he later died, and annexing Armenia as a Roman province, subjugating its surrounding areas as client states. As he did so, a Dacian revolt had broken out, forcing him to send the Syrian governor to go crush it, promoting Hadrian to govern Syria in his place. Only then, with Quietus on his side, he launched the invasion of Parthia, conquering city after city in a pincer move attack. As Trajan sailed down the Euphrates conquering cities, he stopped to build a monument, then conquered the Parthian capital, reaching the Persian Gulf and building a statue for himself to celebrate, deposing Vologases and appointing his own client king for Parthia, annexing Mesopotamia as a new Roman province. It was the culmination of countless Roman legacies.
Yeah, so the conquests, Trajan, more than any other emperor since, well, more than any other emperor really, expanded the empire's territory. And these sort of expansions haven't been seen since the days of Julius Caesar when he conquered Gaul. And although these conquests were very impressive, don't get me wrong, most of them were untenable, such as Mesopotamia and Armenia, for example. Especially Mesopotamia. This was the heartland of the Parthian Empire, and the Romans were never going to be able to hold on, and there was never going to be circumstances that would allow them to integrate that province and make it into a Roman, true Roman province. And there would be countless problems as Hadrian would experience. And that's why he sort of abandoned most of these conquests later down the line.
From the early forefathers' conquest of Italy, to the Scipio's salting of Carthage, the late Republican subjugation of the Grecoids, to Caesar's conquest of Gaul, and his imperial successor's consolidation of the empire. Trajan had brought the empire to its greatest extent.
Yep.
From the North Sea to the Persian Gulf it stretched. The known world had been united under the Roman yoke. Its legions invincible, their emperor almighty, his power unmatched, attained by divine right. The first emperor to ever live up to Augustus. No empire would ever again match Rome's glory. Forevermore, Trajan would be acclaimed as Optimus Princeps, the best emperor.
Yeah, that's literally what the Senate did. They bestowed on him the title of Optimus Princeps, which literally means the best emperor or the best princeps. So it speaks volumes of his great accomplishments. But unfortunately for Trajan's legacy, these conquests were, as I said before, far from permanent. Except with Dacia.
It's all downhill from here. What first got the ball rolling south were the Jews, having migrated to the other eastern provinces after their first revolt failed so spectacularly. Wherever the Jews went, they refused to convert to the Roman gods, being shunned away from society at large. Their resentment...
Oh, you think this Israel-Hamas conflict is something new? No. The Jews have been in trouble with their neighbors since the Roman times and even before then. And it's got especially bad during this time, especially under Hadrian, who comes next.
Towards Roman rule culminated in Cyrene, with Lucullus, for he had a theory, this Lucullus. The reason why the first Jewish war was lost, Lucullus argued, was that the Jews didn't kill anywhere near enough as many innocent civilians as they should have.
Ah, I see.
And by the gods did he ever put that theory to the test. Proclaiming himself king of the Jews and inciting religious fervor in Cyrene, Lucullus threw another great Jewish revolt. It soon spread all over the east, with him using his forces to persecute and genocide as many civilized Roman civilians as he could. And I do mean genocide. 240,000 killed in Cyprus, 220,000 killed in...
Yeah, I don't know about these numbers. They are probably quite an exaggeration, but many people lost their lives, including Jews, during this revolt before the Romans could put it down.
Cyrene, and Jupiter only knows how many in the other provinces, and after slaughtering the severely outnumbered Roman garrisons, they had the dead's flesh cooked for meat, their skin used for belts, and the survivors thrown to wild beasts. Once the revolt spreads to Mesopotamia itself, along with some cities still resisting being civilized,
here we go.
And a Parthian revolt breaking out, Trajan was forced to turn his forces back. As he put down the troubles in Mesopotamia, he sent Lucius Quietus to save the eastern provinces from the Jews, cornering the rebels on Judea, where he crushed them so efficiently that the whole Second Jewish War was named after his corrupted name. Back in the front lines, Trajan was dealing with the last pockets of resistance. After pondering the divine beauty of the desert sun a little too much, he suffered a heat stroke. As he was being taken back to Rome, he urged to write an official letter proclaiming Hadrian as his heir. But his worn-down body gave out before he had a chance, dying after almost 20 years in power. And what 20 glorious years those were!
Glorious
now,
indeed.
Plotina being your standard Roman viper, this is where she would betray the emperor's wishes. But, as I've mentioned, she was a virtuous one. Keeping Trajan's death a secret, she had an actor mimic his weakened voice, proclaiming Hadrian as his heir, later signing the letter herself, having led Rome to its greatest...
Yeah, there's some controversy, some dispute about what actually happened. Did Trajan name Hadrian his heir on his deathbed? Was this a long-held plan of his? Because there is some evidence that Trajan's and Hadrian's relations worsened over the years, and it was not all that clear that he was the obvious successor. However, Plotina, his wife, had good relations with Hadrian, and it is very possible that she is the one responsible for posthumously having Hadrian adopted by Trajan. And so, it's all shrouded in mystery. We'll probably never find out the truth, but whatever the case, it was a great choice.
Heights. From there on, every future emperor's ascension would be blessed with the words, Felicitor Augusto, melior Traiano. May he be luckier than Augustus, and better than Trajan.
Hadrianus.
As Hadrian read about his cousin's death, an unrivaled weight had been put upon him. If the gods would challenge him with living up to the likes of Trajan, then Hadrian, being acclaimed imperator by his men, would embrace the task head-on. Being the fortunate position of governing Syria and all its legions, the senators couldn't bring themselves to bitch too much. They still hated him though. Why? You're asking the wrong questions. What would come to define Hadrian's rule was an immense love of civilization, combined with a deep hatred for barbarity. The result being a preference for highly trained legions, non-stop constructions, and consolidated borders, the last one being the first he tackled. For as glorious as Trajan's eastern conquests were, it was left to Hadrian to answer the big question. Was the Middle East worth civilizing? Oh no, gods fucking no. So instead of direct rule, Hadrian recalled quietus with his legions, settling with having the new provinces made client kings, except those already integrated into the empire. They could stay.
Yeah, so Hadrian, very wisely in my opinion, decided to pull back on these expansions by Trajan, most of them at least, and consolidate control over these areas. That is his main legacy, consolidation, and we cannot underestimate how important that was for the future stability of the Roman East in particular.
For now. But while the senators kept their vitriol mostly to themselves, one whom did bitch openly was Antinous. He just wouldn't shut up to Hadrian about needing to purge all of Trajan's former staff members, getting refused every time. So Antinous, directly opposing the emperor's orders, had the Praetorians murder 4 ex-consuls whom previously served Trajan, including the former governor of Syria and Lucius Quietus. Once he learned of the murders, Hadrian was horrified, immediately kicking Antinous out of the Praetorian Guard, but the damage was done, and so the senators began bitching without restraint. Ending treason trials and promising not to hurt them didn't please them, so Hadrian turned to the plebs, and to appease them for good, he had all state debts of the past 15 years pardoned, having the Praetorians burn the documents in public,
Very
making
impressive.
him even more popular than any Flavian. Speaking of whom, if Domitian was a micromanager, then Hadrian was a nanomanager, while Trajan left government.
Oh yeah. Hadrian spent perhaps as much as 1/3 of his entire reign outside Italy. He traveled the length of the empire, and he settled provincial disputes. He oversaw construction works himself, and all in all, he just was a very active traveling emperor. And like they said, he was sort of a nano manager. He really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty details of all the goings-on.
To his capable staff, Hadrian meddled with every single imperial affair, ensuring everything operated efficiently and justly. And to do so, he spent over half of his reign traveling through the provinces of the empire. First, he headed to the Rhine, disciplining them to prevent another one of their revolts, later having them prevent another Germanic incursion by upgrading the walls of the Limes Germanicus, which takes us to Britannia, where Hadrian headed north to deal with a recently crushed rebellion, and saw with his own eyes the monstrosities that there lived. Without hesitation, Hadrian ordered a massive wall built to protect the citizens of Britannia
Hadrian's
from the horrors
Wall.
that now laid beyond the wall. He then went to Hispania, where he relaxed by hunting down animals and fucking some twinks, then went south to crush a Moorish rebellion, and then went to the east, there negotiating with the Parthians to stabilize the borders. And during his trips, he just kept building shit wherever he felt like. Everywhere, that is. And as he passed by, he renamed a Thracian city as Adrianople in his honor. Yet another thing for you to remember, pleb. That included reconstructions as well, therefore rebuilding Agrippa's Pantheon in its current form, and moving the Colossus Solis to...
Yeah, so the Roman Pantheon, as it exists now in Rome today, is the one reconstructed by Hadrian himself. The original Pantheon had suffered a fire and had been partially destroyed, and so Hadrian ordered its reconstruction with its magnificent dome, which still to this day is an extremely impressive building, considering the technologies that were available to the Romans back then.
Stay beside it. Along his trips through the east, he indulged the wildest dreams of every Greek twink he found, until he met the most beautiful of them all, Antinous, who possessed an ass of such quality that even Sporus would kill for it. In such a good mood would Antinous put Hadrian, that while in Greece, he allowed the Greekoids to assemble themselves into a pan-Hellenic league led by Athens and Sparta, only for it to be broken apart by petty squabbling, as Hadrian both reassured Rome's authority over its client kings and indulged.
Yeah, so Antinous was Hadrian's favorite, if you want to call him that. And when, spoiler alert, Antinous later dies, he's completely devastated, and he was not the same man ever again.
In the weird religion the Greeks had so shamefully copied from Troy. Afterward, he sailed for Judea, there seeking to restore Jerusalem as a proper civilized Roman city, renaming it Aelia Capitolina, in honor of both him and Jupiter, ordering a temple in his honor to be built, later banning the barbaric practice of circumcision, which all combined to really trigger the Jews a lot. By then, Antinous had come to mean much to Hadrian. It was the truest form of love there was, that of a cum-slut to their master. They even traveled to Egypt, visiting the pyramids and Sphinx as a rich couple in love does. Nevertheless, Antinous was still beset with one great terror, fearing when Hadrian would abandon him for a woman. Little did he know that Hadrian wasn't bisexual. He detested women, like his wife, but Antinous was still driven to depression over it, and as Hadrian was resting by the shore of the Nile, the dead corpse of Antinous floated nearby. The emperor was heartbroken. Drowned in sorrow, he secluded himself into absolute isolation, suffering waves of sadness.
Yeah, it's really a terribly sad story when you stop and think about it, but alas, even with this devastating news, Hadrian continued to perform his duties as the emperor exceptionally well.
Grief and lots of anger. Meanwhile, the Jews were at it again, about to throw yet another
Here
revolt.
we go. The third Jewish revolt.
By the proclaimed Messiah Bar Kokhba, he promised to retake Judea by any means necessary. He gathered his fanatical Jews, slaughtered the local Roman garrisons, and retook Jerusalem for themselves. When the local legions tried to restore peace, they were pushed back by 500,000 rebel Jews.
There were a lot of them.
Bar Kokhba purged Judea of all non-Jews, Romans and Christians alike, along with their wives and children. When news of the massacre reached the emperor, Hadrian went mad.
Oh dear.
He sailed for Judea, followed by 12 legions, and started
12 legions. 12 legion is so overdoing it. That's half the Empire's army, basically, at this point. So I'm not sure about those numbers, but he needed a lot of troops to put down this revolt. It was a really big mess. I'll just leave it like that.
Single Jew he found. No mercy was shown.
Yeah.
No prayer given. Hadrian would settle with nothing less than the complete destruction of Judea.
He's not exaggerating. It was absolutely brutal. Yeah, there was some looting involved. Yeah. That's one of the things Hadrian did. He renamed the province from Judea to Syria Palestina, which, Palestine is the name of the region still today. And that's not the origin of the term Palestine, but it's one of the reasons the name stuck for the region. It was Hadrian who renamed it to that. Syria Palestina basically means Syrian Palestine. Yeah. It was bad. Half a million? That's probably not an exaggeration, actually. It was an absolute slaughterfest. Everything Jewish was destroyed. Like Hadrian did, he renamed Jerusalem itself to Aelia Capitolina. And yeah. So, when we think about the situation in Israel, Palestine today, just remember, there have been worse occasions for the Jews. Judea delenda est. Oh dear.
May his bones be crushed. I already missed Josephus. But as history often teaches us, discounting your rage on the Jews can only get you so far. The truth was, after 2 decades ruling the empire, Hadrian had grown old and tired. His heart was kindled somewhat after an astrologer told him of a falling star, claiming it was proof of Antinous' divinity. He would from here on be worshipped as the god of twink beauty. But all came to a head.
Oh yeah, Hadrian had Antinous deified, which, okay, that's an interesting move, but this would become more common practice later on. Every emperor became deified, and the emperors would deify people important to them. And yeah, it's part of the whole imperial cult.
When Hadrian finished the Temple of Venus, building it to please his hero, Apollodorus, asking him for criticism. But just after he did so, he died, leaving Hadrian with no heroes in this already loveless, familyless, friendless world he lived in. As death neared the emperor, Hadrian was consumed by the issue of succession. His only male relative old enough to take over was Fuscus, his nephew, guarded by Servianus, a barely civilized Iberian. But Fuscus had proven himself to be nothing but a hedonist degenerate, so Hadrian refused to make him his heir, for the good of the empire. But said good wasn't in the mind of the claimants, whom, in their rage, attempted to overthrow Hadrian, only to get absolutely trashed, and sentenced to death. Before he died, Servianus threw an Iberian curse on Hadrian, dooming him to beg for death, but be unable to die. With their deaths, all hope to prevent another civil war seemed to be lost, which was when Hadrian met him. The great-great-great-nephew of Trajan, a young genius of a supremely gifted intellect, unparalleled virtue, and the fullest admiration for honor and duty. From that day on, Marcus became the solution to the emperor's problems. But not quite, while absolutely...
Yeah, so Hadrian wanted Marcus Antonius to be his successor, but Marcus was, in his estimation, not ready yet. He was too young, and he needed a stopgap emperor, basically, and that's when he found Antoninus Pius.
Perfect in every way, Marcus was still too young. So to serve as a stopgap, Hadrian got a man named Lucius Caeanus Commodus to adopt as his heir. Then he died of tuberculosis. Yup, leaving his son Lucius Verus behind as well. But no problem, cause Hadrian adopted one of the few virtuous senators still left, Titus Aurelius Antoninus, to take his place. It wasn't that simple. Hadrian offered the adoption, and Antoninus, wondering if he was worthy enough, needed a few days to consider. But he came around to it, the conditions for the adoption being that he would in turn adopt Marcus, then named Marcus Aurelius, whom was made to marry Antoninus' daughter Faustina.
Yeah, and this sort of arrangements would become more common practice, but adoption was the usual method for a Roman emperor to pick his successor. And this is due to the fact that, Augustus never established a method of succession. So it was basically left up to every emperor to decide who would succeed him. And adoption became the usual method. It was quite uncommon, actually, for a son to succeed his father as emperor in Rome. Unlike when we look at the medieval and early modern European kingdoms where hereditary succession, direct bloodline succession, was very common.
With whom, despite hating sex, he had 13 children with, fulfilling his duty as a husband. Antoninus was also made to adopt Lucius Verus as well, cause why not, he was a cool guy, as we'll see. And with the succession settled, Hadrian finally allowed himself to start dying. Such was his agony in his last days that he ordered several men to kill him, but so strong was the aura of respect he had built around him, his slaves just kept killing themselves to not disobey him. Antoninus then took care of him, getting rid of any knives Hadrian kept sneaking into the room, until the emperor, after so much begging, finally died, leaving Antoninus to continue the dynasty that would be named after him. And he did absolutely nothing for 23 years.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate summation of Antoninus Pius's reign. He was a very able administrator. He did lots to centralize the imperial bureaucracy. He did financial reforms, and he consolidated the empire. And there were no major crises during his reign, basically. He just sat there, and he didn't travel too much, unlike Hadrian, who traveled all over the empire. Antoninus Pius sat in Rome for most of his reign, and it was a good reign. Nothing happened. Reforms were undertaken. The Pax Romana continued. It was truly the golden age of Rome, and 23 years, very successful reign, but he was never really challenged, unlike previous emperors and those who would come after. So, good on him.
Based. Well, he did order the deification of Hadrian against the Senate's wishes, gaining him the title Pius, the Dutiful. But things generally just happened around him. Like when the legions pushed north and built the Antonine Wall, slaves were given more rights, out of mercy, Roman representatives were sent to China through the Indian Ocean, all while he remained in Italy, never leaving it, not once. Oh, and that time when the new king of Parthia, Vologases IV, reunited his shithole kingdom and threatened to invade. So Antoninus just sent him a letter, saying, encroachment on Roman territory would not be taken lightly, which was enough to make Vologases back down. But having reached his late 70s, Antoninus, after cursing out to the Parthians for daring to disrupt Roman imperial order, succumbed to old age, dying in his bed, leaving the empire to the greatest Roman alive at the time, him and his adoptive brother.
Marcus Aurelius, of course. I said Marcus Antonius, I think, before. Marcus Aurelius is, of course, the correct one. Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus became co-emperors, and this is the first time this happened in Roman history. So there's that.
The Nerva Antonine dynasty, so far, had been blessed with great emperors, and Marcus Aurelius was no exception. Unfortunately, in the first year of his reign, he would be faced with a monumental tragedy. Faustina, after birthing many kids, such as Lucilla, had given birth to twins, one of which died soon after birth. But that was not it. The real tragedy was that the youngest twin, a boy named Commodus, survived. The hard truth was that the greatness that defined the Trojans and early Romans had been fading for centuries, becoming ever rarer. More and more, great men gave birth to weak fools. Marcus Aurelius could feel that dark times were ahead for the empire. From time immemorial, the patrician Aurelianus clan had been entrusted with the cult of Sol, the solar god of victory. As the newest member of the clan, Marcus embraced his duty. Having been boosted through the cursus honorum by Hadrian, being taught by the wisest man of his time, and reading the works of Stoics such as Seneca, Marcus Aurelius grew to be by far the wisest emperor to have ever lived. After Antoninus' death,
Marcus Aurelius was, contrary to popular belief, more of a philosopher, a scholar, a thinker, than he was a warrior emperor. But that's sort of what he's become known for. And of course, his most famous work is Meditations, a very much appreciated work to this day.
Senate sought to betray Hadrian's last wishes and proclaim only Marcus the princeps, but he shunned their efforts, demanding that equal power was granted to Lucius, as had been wished by his adoptive grandfather. The senators, as always, relented, and thus Marcus and Lucius became the first co-emperors to rule Rome, after just finishing a joint consulship, so that's neat. Next, the co-emperors had to deal with the ever-corrupting Praetorian Guard, drowning them with bribes, to Marcus's disgust.
Unfortunately, this was the most common solution to the Praetorian problem. Many emperors just kicked the can down the road with bribes.
And once Vologasius heard Antoninus was dead, he went ahead with his invasion, ransacking the east, taking over Armenia, etc., etc. To counter their aggression, Marcus was forced to relocate several Danubian legions to the east, appointing Varus to lead them against Parthia. He then meandered around for about a year, arrived in Antioch, and began partying, playing, and fucking non-stop, while delegating highly skilled legates such as Pertinax and Avidius Cassius to crush the eastern barbarians in his name. Which they did, not only retaking Armenia with ease, but beating the Parthians all the way back to their capital and burning it to the ground. Vologasius then sued for peace with Varus, whom, after marrying Marcus's daughter Lucilla, demanded the annexation of portions of Armenia and Mesopotamia, naming himself Parthicus Mediacus Maximus. Both emperors
Impressive
celebrated
title.
a triumph, Varus out of joy, and Marcus out of necessity. Butthurt beyond belief, Vologasius called upon a terrible curse on the world, using his own Eastern black magic.
Not the Eastern black magic. The cause of so much suffering.
To wish for the deaths of millions in a pitiful display of rage. The result was the Antonine Plague, a smallpox epidemic that would indeed kill millions of innocent Romans and soldiers alike. Another terrible consequence of the war was that now that the Danube was mostly demilitarized, the Germans saw their opportunity to strike. One of the biggest Germanic tribes were the Marcomanni, led by the barbarian king Balomar.
So unfortunately, yes, this will come a little more common later down the line here, but the Antonine Plague is really the first major, I wouldn't say pandemic because it was not on a global scale, but the first major epidemic in Roman, well, not Roman history, but during the empire. And it was devastating to the military and financial situation of the empire, and subsequent plagues like the plague of Cyprian and so on would continue to destabilize the empire's internal affairs. And it's one of the major contributing factors to the downfall of the empire, in my estimation.
Seeking to destroy civilization once and for all, Balomar promised to bring forth the chaos and destruction the Germs always desired, uniting the tribes under a single Germanic confederation, including the Quadi,
Here we go
the
again,
Zadi,
the
migrating
Germs.
Yazigi nomads, and the evilest of them all, the Vandals. Starting the
We will hear so much about the Vandals. I don't want to think about it. It's too depressing.
Marcomannic Wars, the Chatti invaded both provinces of Raetia and Germania Superior, getting beaten back by the Rhine legions. The Germs then focused on the Danube, invading Pannonia and also getting beaten back by the legions. The local governor even summoned the tribal leaders to answer for their aggression. Being led by Balomar, they promised to leave the empire peacefully. The governor was persuaded to trust them, letting them go. And when he returned to governance, Balomar invaded again and killed him. If there is a lesson to be learned here, I already taught it. In the same year, the Vandals and Yazidis invaded Dacia, killing its governor and later pillaging Moesia. Called to action once more, both Marcus and Lucius prepared to march north and save the empire, only for Varus to contract the Antonine Plague and suddenly die. Marcus mourned his adoptive brother's death, taking responsibility for his family. For better or worse, Marcus was now the sole emperor. Leading the Roman response, Marcus liberated the provinces of Dacia and Moesia, but to his back, the Germs invaded again, using the Roman roads to ransack Pannonia all the way to the Balkans. It was through these roads that Balomar also invaded, overwhelming the legions with his hordes and taking over Noricum, pillaging his way south into Italy and laying siege to Aquileia. But being too uncivilized to possess any siege weapons, Aquileia held long enough for Marcus to march west, pushing Balomar back north. Marcus set pursuit, crossing the Danube and raining retaliation on the Germs so hard that both the Yazigis and Quadi broke off the confederation.
And here we see an emerging problem, the barbarian German tribal invasions that would continue to plague northern Italy and the Balkans for many, 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 many centuries to come.
At the same time, a Hispanic legate challenged a Germanic king to single combat, defeating him with ease, and kicking his entire tribe out of the coalition as well. And so, Marcus sang praises of Maximus and made him one of his top legates. And then suddenly, the Quadi betrayed their word, rejoining the Confederation, alongside the Yazigis. By that point, Marcus had reached the...
It's a game of whack-a-mole at this point. Destroy one tribal confederation, another one sprouts up.
Same conclusion Germanicus once did. Only the complete extermination of the Germanic hordes would ensure
the
peace.
German question.
His mind made up, Marcus sent all of his legates to purge the forests, including ones like Pesquinius Niger and Clodius Albinus. And during the night, he put his philosophical brilliance to the paper, producing the Meditations, the ultimate guide for living a virtuous Stoic life. As the war raged, the gods joined on Rome's side, striking blows on barbarians during sieges and starting rainstorms when the legions ran short on water. Getting beaten to a bloody pulp, both the Quadi and Yazigis surrendered to Marcus, real this time. And with this great victory at hand, the entire East rose in revolt. Yeah, remember Avidius Cassius? He had been in correspondence with the Empress, and with her melodramatic waning, it seemed like Marcus was about to die. Fearing a civil war, Avidius Cassius proclaimed himself emperor to prevent a power vacuum.
Another problem will become, unfortunately, more and more common when people sensed a weakness in the central imperial government. People were quick to take advantage, like a false rumor, for example. And this is not the first or the last time a false rumor started a civil war in the Roman Empire. And it's very unfortunate. This is the decline that's starting now. It's really painful to watch.
Thing is, Marcus was still alive, but before he could do anything, the Senate declared his old friend an enemy of the state. Avidius Cassius was then murdered by one of his centurions, and Marcus refused to see the body. After crushing the last remnants of the Germanic hordes, it became clear the emperor was indeed nearing his death. Despite old and weak, Marcus saw that the purged German lands were annexed into the provinces of Marcomannia and Sarmatia, and finally, it was time to revise his succession. Having called upon Maximus to his tent, he adopted him as his heir, and fearing the rise of incompetent emperors in the future, he entrusted Maximus to restore the Republic and cleanse Rome of the corruption that had crippled it long ago. As he went to inform Commodus of his choice, bitter and lusting for power, he had Marcus suffocated, killing his own father. He then lied about Marcus dying of natural causes, securing the support of the legions, except Maximus, and declaring himself the new emperor. The second sin.
He deserves that. Commodus is unfortunately the start of the very long, painful decline of the Roman Empire. This is the end of the Golden Age, and it's just gonna go downwards from here on out. Commodus would prove an exceptionally incompetent emperor, more interested in playing gladiator than tending to imperial affairs, and what can I say? I shed a tear for the empire.
Century is often remembered as Rome's Golden Age, and yeah, it's thanks to Commodus why we're now saying goodbye to it. After ordering the death of Maximus and hearing that he escaped, Commodus ordered the death of his entire family back in Hispania. Right after, he ordered the abandonment of his father's conquests, letting the Germans go without punishment so he could return Rome and be a hedonist degenerate. And that's exactly what he did, being such a shit emperor that he already began being conspired against. To counter this, Commodus ran a massive purge of the Senate, the good, competent senators still left that is, filling the Senate with even more incompetent fools, spending his days making everyone's lives miserable, including Pertinax, Salvius Julianus, remember that last name, and a competent provincial governor named Septimius Severus. And Severus is not a man you make angry. And while the
Septimius Severus will show up shortly.
Empire drowned in revolts, Commodus LARPed as Hercules Reborn, wielding a giant barbarian club to torture amputee war
this is so
veterans
bad.
and crush midgets in the Colosseum. It was left to Pertinax to actually crush the revolts, alongside Pesquinius Niger, the last one remaining being by Clodius Albinus in Britannia, but it was never resolved. To glorify his newly named Senate, Commodus named 25 worthless men to serve as consuls in the same year, among them Septimius Severus, and he was not having it. And as yet another great fire broke out in Rome, Commodus was busy renaming the city as Colonia Lucia Aenia Commodiana, the Romans as the Commodians, and every single month of the year named after his 12 self-given titles: Lucius, Aelius, Aurelius, Commodus, Augustus, Herculeus, Romanus, Exuperatorius, Amazonius, Invictus, Felix, Pius. And to celebrate, Commodus ordered the reenactment of the Battle of Zama on the Colosseum, but the Punic gladiators were well led, winning the match. Commodus then came down to congratulate the winner, whom then revealed himself as Maximus, vowing revenge for his emperor's and family's deaths. After failing to have Maximus die in the arena, he threatened his own nephew's life to his sister, forcing her to reveal another plot against him. After all his friends were killed, Maximus was imprisoned and set to fight Commodus in a match, being stabbed before her hands to ensure his death. Mortally wounded, Maximus was thrown into the Colosseum to fight Commodus. True emperor versus pathetic larper. Maximus quickly gained the advantage, despite increasingly losing consciousness. Commodus then attacked with a hidden dagger, being countered and stabbed to death with it. Having avenged his loved ones, Maximus relayed Marcus's wish to restore the Republic, then giving in to his injuries. As Lucilla arrived, it was too late. Maximus was dead. Rome's golden age has ended. Its best days forever gone. While the glory of the past may be lost, its memory will live on.
Indeed.
For there once was a dream.
A dream of Rome.
A dream called Rome.
Oh dear. This was like a movie. Alright, that was the end of the video. What can I say? I can't really add anything to Commodus's rule. It was just an epic disaster, and rarely has a son failed his father so much, failed to honor his legacy, as Commodus did. He was an absolute disgrace to all Roman virtues and traditions, and his lineage, and he deserved what he got. And unfortunately, the damage caused by Commodus during his reign proved irreparable. But alas, that is something for the next video, and I shall see you then. If you liked the video, leave a like, leave a comment if you have some additional context. I will respond. And subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys next time.